This isn't a key to my apartment, Daniel. It's a key to something my father died trying to protect. Daniel Reyes is an internal auditor at Callaway Enterprises, a family-run conglomerate in New York, and one of the few employees who owes his position to merit rather than legacy. When his CEO, Vivian Callaway, asks him to stay late for what he assumes is a routine project, she hands him something far stranger than a file: the key to an apartment that does not appear on any record connected to her name. What begins as a simple errand pulls Daniel into a hidden war over the Callaway family fortune, a death that was never properly investigated, and a woman who has spent years trusting no one, because the last time she did, she lost her father. As Daniel and Vivian circle each other with suspicion and undeniable attraction, a traitor closer to Vivian than either of them expects moves to bury the truth for good. Chapter 1. I had been at Callaway Enterprises for 3 years, and in that time, I had learned exactly one rule that mattered. Nobody who wasn't born into the family ever got called upstairs after 7 o'clock, unless something had already gone wrong. So when Vivian Callaway's assistant told me the CEO wanted me in her office at 7:15, I spent the elevator ride running through every account I'd touched that quarter, trying to guess which discrepancy I'd missed. Vivian's office took up the corner of the 40th floor glass on 2 sides the city, smearing gold and gray beyond her shoulder. She didn't look up right away. She was standing at the window with her arms crossed, and for a second before she turned, I saw something on her face I didn't expect from the woman the board called the Ice Queen of Callaway Tower. She looked tired, in a way that had nothing to do with hours worked. "Mr. Reyes," she said, turning, and just like that, the tiredness folded itself away behind the mask everyone knew. "Thank you for staying." "Of course. You said you had a file for me." "I did say that." She crossed to her desk, opened the top drawer, and for a moment I actually saw the manila folder I'd been expecting sitting right there. Then she closed the drawer without touching it. Instead, she picked up something small from beside her keyboard and held it out to me. A single brass key on a plain ring. No tag, no label. I looked at it, then at her, waiting for the punchline. "It's the key to my apartment," she said. "I'm sorry, not the penthouse everyone thinks is my apartment. A building on Orchard Street. Nobody at this company knows the address except you as of right now." I didn't take it. My hand stayed exactly where it was, halfway raised, like my body understood something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. In 3 years, I had watched a dozen executives get quietly destroyed for far smaller missteps than accepting an unmarked key from the CEO after hours. I thought about my mother, who had scrubbed floors in 3 different office towers so I could go to a college that people like the Callaways considered a safety school. I thought about every reason a man like me should turn around and walk out of that office right now and pretend this conversation never happened. "Miss Callaway, I don't think I understand what's being asked of me." "I know how this looks," she said, and there was something almost amused in her voice, though her eyes weren't amused at all. "You think I'm testing you, or that I'm about to ruin your career the moment you touch that key. I promise you, neither of those things is true. What's true is that I need someone to hold something for me who isn't already inside the circle of people I can't trust anymore. That circle used to include almost everyone in this building. As of this week, it's gotten smaller." "Why me?" "Because 6 months ago you flagged an irregularity in the Meridian acquisition numbers that 3 senior auditors missed, and instead of bringing it to your supervisor who reports to my uncle, you brought it directly to my office. You didn't know what you were walking into. You just knew the numbers were wrong, and you wanted them fixed." She paused. "I've been waiting to see if you'd do something like that again before I decided whether I could trust you with something heavier." I remembered that meeting. I remembered how uncomfortable it had made me, sitting across from her while she asked question after question that made it clear she already suspected the answer and was simply confirming it through me. I had walked out of that meeting certain I'd made an enemy of someone in the finance division. I hadn't realized I might have passed a test I didn't know I was taking. "What's inside the apartment?" I asked. "Not a what, a box, locked. I need you to keep it somewhere I don't own in a name that isn't mine until I tell you otherwise." "And if I say no?" "Then you walk out, I find someone else, and you keep your job exactly as it is. No consequences, no record of this conversation. Her voice didn't change at all when she said it, which somehow made it more believable than if she'd tried to reassure me. I'm not going to pretend there's no risk in saying yes, Daniel. There is. I wouldn't be asking if there weren't. It was the first time she'd used my first name. I took the key. I don't fully know why, even now, looking back on everything that came after. Maybe it was pride, the small, ugly thrill of being trusted with something the family itself apparently couldn't trust each other with. Maybe it was the exhaustion in her face at the window, the crack in the mask before she'd noticed I was in the room. Maybe it was simpler than either of those things. I was curious, and curiosity has ruined smarter men than me. There's a box, she said again, as if she needed to hear herself say it plainly. Inside a wall safe behind the bookshelf. Combination is my mother's birthday backwards. Bring it to me tomorrow night, same time, and don't open it. You're not going to tell me what's in it? No. You're asking me to break into an apartment I've never seen, based on an address you haven't given me yet, to retrieve a box I'm not allowed to look inside for a woman I've spoken to maybe 4 times in 3 years. For the first time that night, something like a real smile touched her mouth, gone almost as fast as it appeared. When you say it like that, it does sound insane. It sounds like the kind of thing that gets people fired, or worse. It's the kind of thing that got my father killed, she said, and the room went very quiet. This isn't a key to my apartment, Daniel. It's a key to something my father died trying to protect. I need it back, and I need it kept safe by someone Marcus Calloway has never bothered to notice. I had been at Calloway Enterprises long enough to know the official story of Richard Calloway's death. A fall on wet stairs at the family's lake house 18 months earlier, ruled an accident by the county coroner, mourned publicly for exactly 1 news cycle before the company's stock price and the family's attention moved on. I had never once heard anyone inside those walls suggest it had been anything else. Are you saying your father was murdered? I'm saying I don't know what I'm saying yet. That's why I need the box. She handed me a slip of paper with the address written in small, precise handwriting. No more emotion in it than a line item on a budget report. Please, Daniel, I wouldn't ask if there was anyone else left to ask. I took the paper, along with the key, folded them both into my coat pocket, like they weighed nothing, though by the time I reached the elevator, my hands weren't entirely steady. Orchard Street turned out to be a narrow building above a shuttered tailor shop, nothing like the marble and glass I associated with the Calloway name. The apartment itself, when I let myself in that night, instead of waiting until the next day like a sensible person would have, was small and spare in a way that startled me. A single lamp, a couch that had clearly been slept on more than once. No photographs anywhere, except one propped on a shelf of a man I recognized from company portraits as Richard Calloway Younger, laughing, an arm slung around a girl who could only have been Vivian at maybe 15 years old. I found the bookshelf. I found the safe behind it, exactly where she'd said. My fingers were shaking slightly as I turned the dial her mother's birthday reversed, and the door clicked open on the 3rd try. Inside sat a metal box heavier than it looked, and beneath it, tucked flat against the back of the safe, a single sealed envelope with no name on it at all. I almost left the envelope. I told myself later that some instinct made me take it instead. Some sense that whatever was inside the box, this sealed envelope had been hidden even more carefully folded flat rather than left loose, as though it had been added after the box itself, in a hurry by someone who didn't want it found, even by the person who owned the safe. I put both the box and the envelope into my bag and let myself out, checking the street twice before I moved, feeling, for the first time in my ordinary, careful, unremarkable life, like a man being watched. I was right to feel that way. I simply didn't yet know by whom. Halfway down the block, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. You shouldn't have gone tonight. Bring everything to me first thing tomorrow before you see her. A friend. I stood under a street lamp reading it 3 times, the cold air suddenly feeling much colder. Nobody outside that office knew I had the key. Nobody outside that room had heard the address, which meant either Vivian had told someone else or someone else already knew far more about tonight than they should have. I didn't sleep much. I laid the metal box on my kitchen table and stared at it for an hour, resisting the very simple, very human urge to force the lock myself and see what a dead man had died trying to protect. In the end, I put it in the bottom of my closet, wrapped in an old jacket, and set the sealed envelope beside it, and told myself I would hand both to Vivian exactly as promised, untouched. I almost believed myself. Almost. By morning, 3 things were true that hadn't been true 24 hours earlier. I had a box I wasn't supposed to open. I had a threat from a number I couldn't trace, and somewhere inside Calloway Tower, someone already knew far more about Vivian Calloway's secrets than the woman herself seemed to realize. Chapter 2. The text sat unanswered on my phone all through the morning while I tried to work like a normal employee reviewing normal numbers, though every time someone walked past my desk, I felt my pulse spike in a way that had nothing to do with quarterly reports. At noon, I finally typed back 3 words. Who is this? No reply came for 2 hours. When it did, it was worse than silence. Someone who knows what Richard hid and knows you have no idea what you're carrying? Walk away before it's too late for you two. I brought the message straight to Vivian, catching her between meetings in a hallway, rather than risk another late-night summons that might be noticed. She read it twice on my phone, her face carefully blank, though I saw her thumb tighten against the edge of the screen. Someone knew you went last night, she said quietly. That's not supposed to be possible. Did you tell anyone I was going? No one, not even my assistant. She hesitated just slightly on the word assistant, a hesitation I filed away without understanding why yet. Which means either you were followed or the apartment itself isn't as private as I believed. There's something else, I said, and told her about the envelope I'd found tucked behind the box. For a moment, I thought she might be angry that I'd taken something she hadn't asked for. Instead, something closer to fear crossed her face, quickly smoothed the way. Don't open it, she said. Bring both to me tonight exactly as we planned. Vivian. It was the first time I'd used her first name back. If someone is threatening me over this, I think I've earned the right to know what I'm risking my job for. She looked at me for a long moment, weighing something, and I understood in that look how rarely she let anyone see her actually deciding whether to trust them. My father didn't fall down those stairs, she said finally, voice low enough that I had to lean in to hear it over the hum of the hallway. I've spent 18 months quietly gathering everything that proves it, because the moment I go to the police or the board with an accusation I can't fully back, my Uncle Marcus will bury me in lawsuits and public doubt before I finish the sentence. The box has financial records, wire transfers he wasn't supposed to make. Enough to start pulling the thread, not enough yet to hang him. And the envelope. I don't know, she admitted, and for the first time she sounded genuinely uncertain rather than composed. My father hid the box himself months before he died. I never knew there was anything hidden behind it. That night at the same apartment, under the same single lamp, I finally handed her both the box and the envelope, and watched her hands actually shake as she worked the combination on the small internal lock the box carried. A combination she apparently already knew. Inside were exactly what she'd promised. Wire transfer records, printed and highlighted in her father's handwriting, tracing money moving from a shell account controlled by Marcus Calloway into offshore holdings that had no business relationship with Calloway Enterprises at all. Enough, as she'd said, to raise real questions. Not enough on its own to prove murder. The envelope was different. Inside was a single photograph and a folded note. The photograph showed Richard Calloway at the lake house, alive, standing on the same stairs where he would later be found dead, talking to a woman whose face was turned away from the camera, her hand resting on his forearm, in a way that suggested more familiarity than a casual conversation would explain. The note in Richard's handwriting was addressed to no one, and read only, "If something happens to me, look at who benefits, and look at who was already inside my house that week." Who is she? I asked, nodding at the photograph. Vivian turned it over, searching for a name that wasn't there, and I watched something cold settle over her expression as a thought occurred to her that she clearly didn't want to have. I don't know, she said too quickly, and I understood in that moment that she suspected something she wasn't ready to say aloud, even to me. We sat with it for a long time, the lamp throwing small shadows across the table between us, And for the first time since I'd taken that key from her hand, the danger of what we were doing felt less abstract and more like something with teeth. "There's a board meeting in 3 days," she said finally. "Shareholder review of the Meridian numbers, the same numbers you flagged 6 months ago. Marcus will use it to push for a leadership vote, claiming the company needs, in his words, more stable oversight than a 29-year-old CEO still grieving her father can provide." I was planning to bring the wire transfer evidence there, carefully through counsel, framed as a compliance concern rather than an accusation. And now I don't know if I can trust the timeline I built for myself, because someone already knew about last night before I told anyone at all. She looked at me directly then, in a way that felt entirely different from every professional interaction we'd had before. "I need you at that meeting, Daniel. Not as an auditor, as someone who already understands what these numbers actually mean, and who Marcus doesn't yet know is involved." It should have been an easy decision to refuse. A 3-year employee with no real standing in the family's internal war, being asked to walk directly into the middle of a fight that could end his career the moment anyone in that boardroom learned his name was attached to it. I said yes anyway and told myself it was because the numbers mattered, because Richard Calloway's note asking someone to look at who benefited deserved an answer. I didn't let myself examine too closely the other reason, the one sitting across the table from me with her hands still faintly trembling around a photograph of her dead father. 2 days later, my phone buzzed again with a message from the unknown number, and this one made my stomach drop in a way the others hadn't. "You're at the meeting Thursday. Good. Bring what you found, or I make sure everyone there learns exactly how you got it." Whoever was watching wasn't just threatening me from a distance anymore. They knew the meeting. They knew my role in it before I'd even confirmed I would attend. And that meant one of two things. Either Vivian's inner circle had a leak far deeper than either of us had accounted for, or someone in that inner circle was the leak itself. I thought about her hesitation on the word assistant, and for the first time, I let myself wonder if I already knew, without knowing that I knew, exactly where the danger was coming from. Chapter 3. The boardroom on the 42nd floor was the kind of room built to intimidate. A table long enough to seat 20, portraits of 3 generations of Calloways on the walls, and Marcus Calloway seated at the head of it, like a man already rehearsing the moment he would move to that seat permanently. Vivian walked in 11 minutes late on purpose. I realized forcing the room to wait on her rather than the reverse. I sat 2 seats down from her, technically there as part of the auditing team, asked to present the Meridian figures, though everyone in the room understood by the 3rd sentence out of Marcus's mouth that this meeting was never really about Meridian. "The board has concerns," Marcus said smoothly, "about leadership continuity during a period of significant financial irregularity." "The irregularity," Vivian said, "traces to a shell entity with no operational ties to Callaway Enterprises, funded through transfers authorized under a signature. I'd like this board to examine closely." She slid a folder across the table. Not the original evidence, a carefully sanitized version prepared with counsel, referencing the wire transfers without yet revealing the full scope of what the box contained. Marcus's face didn't move, which told me more than if it had. "I'd be happy to have counsel review whatever concerns you have, Vivian, once we address the more pressing matter at hand. Whether this company can afford a CEO who spends board meetings chasing ghosts instead of managing a struggling quarter." It was working exactly as he intended. I could see it, turning her caution into evidence of instability, her grief into a liability the board could point to. I watched 3 directors who had looked uncertain minutes earlier start nodding along with him. Then a board member I didn't recognize, older, quieter than the rest, cleared his throat and said something that changed the temperature of the entire room. "Before we vote on anything," he said, "I'd like to understand why my name appears on an authorization for a transfer I never signed." The room went still. Marcus's composure cracked for exactly half a second, a flicker so brief I might have missed it if I hadn't been watching for it, before he recovered with a dismissive laugh about clerical errors and outdated systems. But the damage was done. A seed of doubt had entered the room that hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier, and I watched Vivian recognize it too. Watched her decide in real time not to push further, to let the doubt breathe rather than force a confrontation the board wasn't ready to have. The meeting ended without a vote. Marcus left first, moving fast enough that I understood he wanted to be gone before anyone could ask him a second question. Vivian stayed behind, gathering the folder with hands that were steady now in a way they hadn't been over the kitchen table 2 nights earlier. "That went better than I expected," I said once the room had cleared. "It went exactly as badly as I expected," she said. "Marcus just learned that someone on this board is willing to question him publicly, which means he now knows exactly who to isolate next." Outside in the elevator lobby, her assistant Claire was waiting with a stack of messages and a schedule already rearranging itself around the fallout from the meeting. I watched Vivian hand her the folder to file, watched Claire's eyes flick over the cover page a half-second longer than a simple filing task required, and felt something uneasy settle low in my stomach, though I couldn't yet name why. "Miss Calloway, Mr. Marcus asked that you call him within the hour," Claire said, voice perfectly even. "He said it's regarding, and I'm quoting him, a family matter that shouldn't need to involve the whole board." "Thank you, Claire." As we walked away, I said quietly, "How long has she worked for you?" 4 years. She was my father's assistant before she was mine." "Why?" "No reason," I said, though it wasn't true. I was thinking about the photograph, the woman with her hand on Richard Calloway's arm, her face turned deliberately away from the camera, and wondering with a discomfort I didn't want to sit with yet, whether the reason her face had been turned away was that someone standing exactly where Richard was standing that day had wanted it that way on purpose. That evening, Vivian asked me to stay behind after the office emptied, ostensibly to review the sanitized folder's next steps for counsel. We ended up instead simply sitting in her office with the lights low, the city outside doing its slow evening burn, talking about nothing important for the first time since I'd taken that key from her hand. "Why did your father write that note the way he did?" I asked. "Look at who benefits. Look at who was in the house. It reads like a man who already suspected someone specific." "I've asked myself that every day for 18 months, she said. "I used to think it meant Marcus plainly. Now, I'm less sure it's that simple." "What do you mean?" She hesitated longer this time, and I watched her decide something before she spoke. "Marcus isn't clever enough to hide something this well on his own. Someone helped him. Someone with access to the house that week. Someone who knew our schedules, who could move through those halls without anyone questioning why. Family. Or close enough to it that no one thought to look twice." She looked at me then, and something in her face had shifted since the boardroom. Something that had less to do with strategy and more to do with the simple exhaustion of carrying a suspicion she didn't want to be true. "I keep thinking about the note. Who was already inside my house that week? I've been so focused on Marcus that I haven't let myself really ask who else fits that description." I thought about telling her right then what I suspected about Claire. I almost did. But I had no proof, only a half-second glance at a folder, and a hesitation on a word, and I was afraid of poisoning the one person she trusted based on nothing but instinct, especially instinct that had already been wrong about people before. So I said nothing, and told myself it was caution, though later I would understand it had also been fear. Fear of being the man who accused the wrong person, and broke something that couldn't be unbroken. Fear of losing the fragile trust that had grown between us since that first night on Orchard Street. Sitting closer to each other now than either of us had planned, neither of us quite naming what was happening as it happened. "Thank you," she said quietly after a silence that had gone on longer than either of us noticed. "For staying. For all of it. I know I didn't give you much of a choice at the start." "You gave me a choice," I said. "I could have walked out that first night." "Why didn't you?" I thought about the honest answer, the one about her tired face at the window, before she noticed I'd seen it, and gave her a smaller piece of it instead. "Because you looked like someone who needed one person in that building who wasn't waiting for you to fail." Her hand resting on the desk between us moved an inch closer to mine, close enough that neither of us could pretend it was accidental, before her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus's office that broke whatever moment had been building, and she pulled back, composed again, already thinking 3 steps ahead into the fight still waiting for her. but I had felt it, and I understood walking out of that office that night that I was no longer simply a man protecting a box of evidence. I was a man who had started to care dangerously and completely about the woman he was protecting it for. Chapter 4. 2 days after the board meeting, a message came through on my work email from an internal audit account I didn't recognize, forwarding a spreadsheet labeled Meridian Reconciliation Draft with a note attached. Found this buried in shared drive. Thought you should see before Thursday's follow-up. C. The initials sat wrong with me immediately. I opened the spreadsheet carefully, half expecting a trap, and found instead something that made my pulse spike for an entirely different reason. Metadata in the file properties, showing it had been last edited from an internal account belonging to Claire Whitfield, time-stamped the same week Richard Calloway died. I brought it straight to Vivian, along with something else I'd spent the last 2 nights quietly building on my own, driven by the suspicion I hadn't voiced in her office. A full trace of the Shell account transfers, cross-referenced against building access logs from the lake house that week. Logs I'd pulled through a compliance request that technically fell within my job description, if barely. The access logs showed exactly 3 people inside the house during the window the coroner had identified as the likely time of the fall. Richard himself, Marcus, and Claire Whitfield, listed under a guest pass Richard had personally authorized 2 days before he died. She was there, I said, laying the printout on Vivian's desk. The week your father died, under his own authorization. Vivian went very still, staring at the page for a long moment before she spoke. That doesn't prove anything. She could have been there for a dozen reasons. She handled his correspondence, his scheduling. She was there constantly. Vivienne, I kept my voice gentle because I could see exactly how much this cost her to hear. The spreadsheet metadata puts her editing financial documents connected to the Shell account the same week. That's not correspondence. That's the exact kind of access someone would need to help Marcus move money without leaving his own fingerprints on it.
She's worked for this family for 6 years,
Vivian said, and I heard in her voice not disbelief exactly, but the particular grief of watching a wall she'd built her trust on start to crack. My father trusted her completely. That might be exactly why Marcus needed her. We sat with that for a long moment, the office quiet except for the hum of the building settling into evening. Then Vivian did something I hadn't expected. She picked up her phone and called Claire directly, asking her to come up to the office immediately. Her voice perfectly level, giving nothing away. Claire arrived 12 minutes later, professional as always, a tablet in hand, ready to take notes on whatever the CEO needed. Vivian didn't ease into it. She slid the access log and the spreadsheet printout across the desk and watched Claire's face as she read them. For a moment, Claire's composure held. Then it didn't. I can explain, she said, and the words came out too fast, already an admission before any explanation had actually been offered. Then explain, Vivian said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the second word, the only sign of how much this was costing her. What came out over the next 10 minutes was worse than either of us had prepared for. Claire had been quietly feeding information to Marcus for over a year, not out of loyalty to him, but out of desperation. A sick mother whose medical bills had outpaced Claire's salary years earlier. A loan from Marcus that had come with strings attached from the beginning. Small favors that had escalated slowly until she was too deep in to refuse the larger ones. She hadn't been present the moment Richard fell, she insisted, tears actually forming now. Real or performed, I genuinely couldn't tell. She had simply been asked that week to leave a side door unlocked for a maintenance visit Marcus told her had been scheduled. She hadn't questioned it. She hadn't let herself wonder why. You knew, Vivian said quietly, and you let me believe for 18 months that I was chasing ghosts. I was afraid, Claire said. I've been more afraid of Marcus than I ever let myself admit. Even to myself. It should have ended there. Evidence in hand, confession delivered, a clean resolution within reach. It didn't. Because as Claire spoke, her phone sitting face up on the desk, where Vivian had asked her to place it, lit up with a message from a contact saved simply as M. Vivian reached for it before Claire could stop her, and the message on the screen read, If she talks, you know what to do with the last copy of the file. Don't let her leave that office with anything." Claire's face went white. He doesn't mean he wouldn't, but even as she said it, her hand moved toward the tablet she'd brought in. Fast. Too fast, and I understood a half second before it happened what she was doing. Not attacking us, but destroying evidence. Opening a remote wipe application on the shared drive where the last uncorrupted copy of the reconciliation records lived. The copy that traced every transfer back not just to a shell account, but to Marcus's personal authorization, the piece that would have closed the loop entirely. I lunged across the desk to stop her, too late by 3 seconds. The screen flashed a confirmation, file successfully removed. The room went silent, except for Vivian's breathing, sharp and controlled, the sound of a woman forcing herself not to shatter in front of the person who had just helped take something irreplaceable from her. "That was the last copy," Vivian said very quietly to no one in particular. "Everything that connected Marcus directly, not through a shell account, but through his own signature, is gone." Claire was crying openly now, saying something about not meaning for it to go this far, but I barely heard it because I was watching Vivian's face do something I hadn't seen it do in 3 weeks of secrets and stolen keys and boardroom fights. It was breaking just slightly at the edges, the mask finally showing a crack too wide to hide. "Security will need to be called," she said finally, voice steadying itself back into something professional through sheer will. "Claire, you're going to sit in that chair and wait, and then you're going to tell the board everything you just told us. Because right now, that testimony is the only piece of this we have left that Marcus can't erase with a keystroke." Claire nodded, shaking, and Vivian turned away from her toward the window. The same window where I'd first seen her looking tired, in a way that had nothing to do with hours worked. I crossed the room and stood beside her, not touching her, just close enough that she'd know she wasn't standing there alone. "We'll find another way," I said. "The testimony matters. The access logs matter. We're not back at 0. "We're close enough to it," she said, and for the first time since I'd known her, her voice actually broke just slightly on the last word before she caught it and pulled it back under control, leaving both of us standing at that window, with a truth half exposed and a traitor crying quietly behind us, and no clean way yet to finish what her father had died trying to start. Chapter 5. Marcus's office occupied the opposite corner of the 40th floor from Vivian's, decorated in the kind of understated wealth that announced itself louder than any logo could. He was waiting for us when we arrived the next morning, Claire's statement in a sealed envelope in Vivian's bag, the access logs printed and ready, though we both knew walking in that without the wiped financial records, the case against him remained circumstantial enough for a man with his resources to fight. "Vivian." He didn't stand. "And Mr. Reyes. I confess I'm curious what brings the two of you to my office together so early." "Claire has given a full statement," Vivian said, laying the envelope on his desk without sitting down, "about the side door left unlocked the week my father died. About the money she moved on your instruction. About the message you sent yesterday ordering her to destroy evidence in front of 2 witnesses." Marcus's face did something I'd been waiting 3 weeks to see. It actually faltered just for a moment before he rebuilt it into something closer to amusement. "A frightened, indebted woman will say a great deal to save herself from prosecution. Vivian. I'd be careful building an accusation on the word of someone who just admitted by her own account to years of deception. The access logs aren't her word. Those are building records. Records that show I visited my brother's house the week he died. Hardly a crime. I imagine I visited a dozen times that year." He leaned back and I watched him decide in real time to stop pretending fear and start pushing back with everything he had. "You have a distraught assistant and some old spreadsheets that by your own admission have already been deleted. That's not evidence, Vivian. That's a story. And I intend to make sure the board understands the difference publicly at the emergency session I've already called for this afternoon." He hadn't wasted a single day. Word came within the hour that the full board had been summoned ostensibly to address, in Marcus's language, concerns about the CEO's judgment following an internal security incident involving her own assistant. He was moving to frame the entire episode as evidence of Vivian's instability rather than his own guilt, exactly as he had tried at the last meeting. And this time, he had real chaos to point to, instead of vague suspicion. We had 4 hours to find something he couldn't spin. I spent 2 of them back through the compliance systems, chasing a thought that had been nagging at me since the meeting. If Claire had been ordered to wipe the shared drive copy, there was still a chance an automated backup existed somewhere. Marcus didn't know, to reach some system, too boring and bureaucratic for either of them to have considered. I found it in the last place I looked. A legally mandated audit archive the finance department was required to maintain for exactly this kind of dispute, untouched by Claire's remote wipe, because it lived on a separate server she'd never had access credentials for. It wasn't the full picture. It didn't include Marcus's personal authorization the way the deleted file had. But it did include something almost as damning. A complete transaction history showing the Shell account receiving funds on a schedule that lined up, almost to the day, with a series of personal loans Marcus had taken out against his own shares in the company, loans he would have needed desperately if his public financial statements filed with the board only months earlier had been anything close to accurate. "He's been lying about his own finances," Vivian said, reading it over my shoulder in the small conference room we'd claimed as our war room. "If the board sees this, they'll understand exactly why he needed my father's death handled quickly and quietly, before anyone started asking real questions about where his money was actually going." "It's not proof of murder," I said honestly. "It's proof of motive, and proof he's been misleading the board about his own solvency. That might be enough to end him without ever needing the word murder in the room at all." The emergency session began at 4 o'clock, the same long table, the same portraits watching from the walls. Marcus seated at the head with the easy confidence of a man who believed he had already won. Vivian walked in on time this time. No calculated delay, just steady and composed, in a way that made my chest ache with something that wasn't only worry. Marcus spoke first, painting the picture he'd promised. A CEO whose personal assistant had just been caught destroying company files. An internal audit thrown into chaos by unverified accusations. A leadership team too distracted by grief and paranoia to steer the company through a difficult quarter. Then Vivian stood and laid the audit archive printout on the table and let the numbers speak in a way her voice hadn't been allowed to at the last meeting. The room read it in silence. I watched the same older director from before lean forward, adjusting his glasses, cross-referencing dates against something already open on his own laptop. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the particular weight of a man who had just understood he'd been lied to. "Marcus," he said slowly, "these loan dates. They're the same ones you cited to this board 8 months ago as evidence your personal holdings were unencumbered. You told us you'd need no additional support to weather a leadership transition." "That report was drafted by my accountant," Marcus said too quickly. "If there's a discrepancy—" "There isn't a discrepancy," Vivian said. "There's a pattern. Money moving out through a Shell account on a schedule that matches loans you took secretly against shares you told this board were unencumbered in the exact window before my father died, and left you positioned to take control of a company you were, by these numbers, quietly desperate to control." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing at all, and in that silence, I watched the last of the room's confidence in him finally completely break. He didn't confess. Men like Marcus rarely do, in the moment, in front of witnesses, but he also didn't manage a convincing denial, and by the time the session ended, the board had voted unanimously to suspend him, pending a full independent investigation, effective immediately, his office to be secured by security before he left the building. It should have felt like victory. It felt instead like the first real breath either of us had taken in 3 weeks. But the story didn't end cleanly there, and Vivian had warned me on Orchard Street weeks earlier that it wouldn't. The independent investigation would take months. Claire faced her own legal exposure, cooperating now in exchange for leniency her mother's medical bills, still sitting unpaid, a small tragedy tucked inside a larger one. And Marcus, suspended but not yet criminally charged, made it clear as security walked him out that he intended to fight every inch of what came next in courtrooms if he had to. The first attempt to make it right didn't fully work. The board's vote addressed governance, not justice, and Vivian spent that whole evening on the phone with counsel, discovering that without a criminal referral, the suspension alone left Marcus with more room to maneuver than either of us wanted. A setback that left her staring at her own kitchen table, the same one where I'd first laid the box in front of her, looking for a moment like she might finally let herself simply stop. "We'll get there," I said, sitting across from her, watching her turn a pen over in her hands without writing anything. "It's not the ending yet. It's the part where it's not over, but it's not lost either." "You sound very sure of that." "I'm not sure of much right now," I admitted. "I'm sure of that." She looked up at me then, and something in her face had changed since the boardroom, something that had nothing to do with strategy at all. "Daniel," she said my name carefully, like she was testing whether it still fit the same way it had 3 weeks ago before any of this. "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond, because if I stop halfway through, I don't think I'll manage to say it at all." I waited. I've spent 18 months trusting almost no one because the one time I let someone close, my father's own trusted friend, my own family, it cost him everything. I brought you into this because I needed someone outside that circle. I told myself that was the only reason. She set the pen down. It stopped being the only reason very quickly, and I didn't say anything because saying it felt like handing you one more dangerous thing to carry on top of everything else I'd already asked you to hold. "Vivian, let me finish." Her voice wavered just slightly, the crack from the office window returning. Smaller this time, softer. "I don't know how to do this the easy way, the way people do it when there isn't a company and a dead father and a courtroom fight sitting on top of everything. I only know that when Claire's message came through on that phone, my first thought wasn't about the company at all. It was that I might have gotten you hurt for nothing, and that thought frightened me more than anything Marcus has done in 18 months. I reached across the table and took her hand. The same hand that had trembled over the box's combination lock 3 weeks earlier. "Steady now." "I took that key because I was curious," I said. "I stayed because of the numbers and the note your father left, and because I believed you deserved someone in your corner who wasn't waiting for you to fail. But somewhere in the last 3 weeks, that turned into something else. And I think you already know that, because I think you feel the same thing. And I think that's exactly why you're having such a hard time finishing this sentence." She laughed, unsteady, half a sob folded into it. "I never finished it, did I?" "You don't have to. I heard it anyway." What happened next wasn't dramatic, not the way the boardroom fight had been, not the way the phone message flashing across Claire's screen had been. It was quiet, her hand tightening around mine, the small, careful space between us, finally closing a first kiss that tasted faintly of the coffee she'd been drinking too much of for 3 weeks straight, unhurried in a way that told me everything about how much restraint had gone into keeping it from happening sooner. We stayed at that table a long time afterward, not solving anything else that night, simply sitting in the fact that something real had survived everything that had tried to crush it in the last 3 weeks. A dead father's warning finally understood. A traitor's betrayal finally named. An uncle's ambition finally exposed to daylight. And quietly, underneath all of it, 2 people who had started this as a locked box and a stranger's key, and ended it as something neither of us had planned for, and both of us, it turned out, had needed. Marcus's case would take the better part of a year to resolve. Fully criminal charges eventually filed once the independent investigation uncovered what the board's civil suspension alone couldn't reach. Claire testified received leniency in exchange for full cooperation and quietly left the company. Her mother's bills settled at last, through a fund Vivian set up without ever mentioning it publicly. Richard Calloway's death was formally reclassified the following spring from accident to homicide. The case against Marcus built patiently, brick by brick, on records that could no longer simply be wiped from a shared drive with a single keystroke. And on the anniversary of the night I first stood in Vivian Calloway's office, expecting a file and receiving a key instead. We sat together in the same Orchard Street apartment, the safe behind the bookshelf finally empty, nothing left inside it worth hiding. And she told me, half laughing, that she still hadn't decided whether taking that key had been the most reckless decision I ever made or the smartest one. I told her I hadn't decided either, and that I'd stopped needing to, because whichever it was, it had led me here, to a version of my life I never would have written for myself, and wouldn't trade now for anything safer.